The silence in Vincent Dalton's house had grown so thick over the past 8 months that even the creaking floorboards seemed to hold their breath. And as he stood at the window of his modest ranch house outside Eureka Springs, Arkansas, watching his 2 children pick listlessly at the fence posts in the yard, he wondered if joy would ever return to their hollow eyes. It was May of 1882, and the spring that should have brought renewal only seemed to mock the barrenness that had settled over their lives since Sarah's fever had taken her last September. Vincent was 32 years old, though grief had carved lines around his eyes that made him look older. He had been a decent husband, a hard-working rancher who'd carved out a respectable life from the rough Arkansas hill country. But without Sarah's laughter filling the rooms, without her gentle voice calling the children to supper, the house felt more like a tomb than a home. His daughter Emma was 7 now, and his son Thomas had just turned 5. Neither had smiled since they'd buried their mother in the little cemetery behind the Baptist church in town. He watched them now through the wavy glass, Emma's dark braids hanging limp down her back as she traced patterns in the dirt with a stick, Thomas sitting cross-legged beside her, his small face blank as a winter sky. They went through the motions of living, ate when told to eat, slept when put to bed, but the spark that made them children had been extinguished along with their mother's life. Vincent turned away from the window, guilt gnawing at his chest. He had tried everything he could think of. He'd bought Emma a new doll from the mercantile, though she'd only held it politely before setting it aside. He'd carved Thomas a wooden horse, which now sat untouched on the boy's shelf. He'd even attempted to bake Sarah's apple cake, burning it so badly that the kitchen had filled with smoke. The children had eaten it without complaint, without comment, without anything resembling emotion. The sound of a wagon rolling up the dirt road made him glance out again. His nearest neighbor, the widow Davison, was returning from town. Diana Kendrick had arrived just 3 months ago, moving into the old Henderson place that had stood empty for 2 years. She was a young widow herself, maybe 27 or 28, who kept mostly to herself. Vincent had seen her in passing, had tipped his hat politely when their paths crossed at the general store, but they'd never exchanged more than brief pleasantries. She was an attractive woman, he'd noticed in the detached way of a man still mourning his wife. With honey-colored hair, she kept pinned up beneath a simple bonnet and warm brown eyes that seemed to carry their own measure of sadness. He'd heard she'd lost her husband in a mining accident up in Colorado 2 years back, that she'd come to Arkansas to make a fresh start with a small inheritance. Vincent watched as she climbed down from her wagon, struggling with several heavy sacks of supplies. Without thinking, he grabbed his hat and headed outside. It was what Sarah would have wanted, what decent neighbors did for each other. "Mrs. Kendrick," he called, approaching her property line. "Let me help you with those." She looked up, surprised, a loose strand of honey hair falling across her face. "Mr. Dalton, that's kind of you, but I can manage." "I'm sure you can," Vincent said, already crossing onto her land, "but no sense in struggling when I've got 2 good arms standing idle." A slight smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen from her. "Well, I won't argue with good sense." He hefted the heavy sacks of flour and beans, carrying them up onto her porch while she gathered the smaller parcels. As he set them down, he heard a sound that made him freeze. Laughter. High and bright and utterly unexpected. Vincent turned to see Emma and Thomas standing at the property line, staring transfixed at Diana Kendrick's porch, where a large orange cat had appeared and was now rubbing against the widow's skirts, purring loud enough to hear from several feet away. "That's Marmalade," Diana said, her voice gentle as she noticed the children's attention. "He's a terrible beggar and thinks he runs this whole property." As if to prove her point, the cat meowed loudly and stood on his hind legs, pawing at her skirt. Thomas took an involuntary step forward, his eyes wider than Vincent had seen them in months. "Would you like to pet him?" Diana asked, directing the question to the children. Vincent opened his mouth to decline for them, to shepherd his children back home, but Thomas was already nodding, actually nodding, showing interest in something for the first time since the funeral. Emma followed her brother, moving slowly toward the porch. Diana scooped up the large cat and sat down on her porch step, settling him in her lap. "He loves children. My neighbor's little ones back in Colorado used to visit him every day." Thomas reached out a tentative hand, touching the cat's soft fur. Marmalade immediately began purring louder, pushing his head against the boy's palm. Emma knelt beside her brother, and soon both children were stroking the contented feline, their faces showing something Vincent had almost forgotten they were capable of: engagement. "I should let you get back to your day," Vincent said quietly, not wanting to break the spell but feeling suddenly intrusive. Diana looked up at him, and something passed between them, an understanding of loss, of loneliness, of the small mercies that made grief bearable. "They're welcome to visit Marmalade anytime," she said. "He gets lonely during the day when I'm working in the garden. That's generous of you. It's nothing, truly." She paused, then added, "I lost my husband 2 years ago. I know how grief can hollow out a home." Vincent nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He hadn't talked about Sarah with anyone except the preacher, hadn't let himself acknowledge the depth of the void she'd left. "Emma Thomas," he finally said, "we should let Mrs. Kendrick get on with her day." The children rose reluctantly, but as they did, Emma looked at the widow and said, "Thank you," in a small voice. It was the first time Vincent had heard her speak without being directly prompted in weeks. That night, as Vincent tucked Thomas into bed, his son asked, "Papa, can we visit Marmalade tomorrow?" "We'll see," Vincent said, his throat tight. "Maybe." He was very soft, Thomas continued, already half asleep. Mama would have liked him. It was the first time either child had mentioned Sarah voluntarily, and Vincent had to step out into the hallway to compose himself, leaning against the wall as silent tears tracked down his weathered face. The next afternoon, Vincent found Emma and Thomas standing at the property line again, clearly wanting to visit the widow's cat but too well-mannered to cross without permission. He sighed, set down the fence post he'd been preparing to replace, and walked over to them. "Come on then," he said. "But we ask properly." Diana was in her garden, wearing a faded work dress and a wide-brimmed hat against the May sun. She looked up as they approached, dirt smudged on her cheek, and smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less careworn. "We were hoping," Vincent began, feeling oddly nervous, "that the children might visit your cat again, if it's not an imposition." "No imposition at all," Diana said, straightening up. "Marmalade's been watching out the window all morning like he's waiting for something. I think he enjoyed the attention yesterday." The children didn't need further invitation. They hurried toward the porch, where the orange cat was indeed sitting in the window, his tail swishing. As soon as Diana opened the door, he bounded out to greet them. "I've got fresh lemonade," Diana said to Vincent. "If you'd like some while you wait." It would have been rude to refuse, so Vincent followed her into the kitchen while the children played with Marmalade on the porch. Her house was tidy but sparsely furnished, the home of someone still getting settled or someone who'd left most of their past behind. "How are you finding Eureka Springs?" Vincent asked, accepting the glass she offered. "It's peaceful," Diana said, pouring one for herself. "Different from Colorado." "Greener. The mountains there were stark and beautiful, but this feels gentler somehow. Your husband was a miner, her expression clouded. Yes, Daniel, there was a collapse. He and 3 other men. She took a sip of lemonade, her hand steady despite the pain in her eyes. It's been 2 years, but some days it feels like yesterday. 8 months for me, Vincent said quietly. Fever took Sarah. 1 week she was fine, the next she was gone. The children were hers. Yes, Emma and Thomas, they've been lost since she died. Today's the most life I've seen in them since September. Diana glanced out the window to where Emma was now laughing, actually laughing, as Marmalade chased a piece of string Thomas was dragging across the porch. Grief is strange. Sometimes the smallest things can reach us when everything else fails. They talked for over an hour, about loss and loneliness, about the challenge of continuing when the person who made life meaningful was gone, about the guilt that came with moments of happiness or forgetfulness. Vincent found himself telling her things he'd never said aloud, about how he sometimes forgot Sarah was dead and turned to tell her something, about how he'd given away all her clothes because he couldn't bear to see them but then regretted it, because now he had nothing of her to hold. I kept one of Daniel's shirts, Diana admitted. Just one. It doesn't smell like him anymore, but I can't let it go. When Vincent finally gathered the children to leave, Emma asked, "Can we come back tomorrow?" Vincent looked at Diana, who nodded. Marmalade would love that. As they walked home, Thomas slipped his small hand into Vincent's. It was such a simple gesture, but it nearly undid him. His son hadn't reached for him in months. The visits became a daily occurrence. Vincent would finish the most pressing morning chores, then walk the children over to Diana's property. At first he stayed only briefly, but gradually the visits lengthened. Diana would bring out lemonade or coffee, and they would sit on her porch talking while the children played with the cat. Vincent learned that Diana had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, that she loved reading, that she played piano though she'd had to sell hers before the move. Diana learned that Vincent had built his ranch from almost nothing, that he'd met Sarah at a church social and known immediately she was the one, that he'd never imagined raising children alone. One afternoon in early June, Vincent arrived to find Diana struggling with a broken porch railing. "Let me fix that," he said immediately. "I can't keep imposing on your time," Diana protested. "You've already helped so much with the supplies, and you've given my children back their childhood," Vincent replied firmly. "Let me do this." He returned the next day with tools and fresh lumber, spending the afternoon repairing not just the railing but several other things he noticed needed attention. A loose shutter, a sagging gate, a section of roof that looked ready to leak. Diana brought him water and insisted he stay for supper as payment. It was the first meal Vincent had eaten that he didn't have to cook himself since Sarah died, and the first time in months he'd sat at a table that felt like a home rather than just a house. Diana had made chicken and dumplings, simple fare but perfectly seasoned, and the children ate with actual appetite. After supper, Diana sat at her small parlor organ, not a piano but serviceable, and played a few songs. Emma stood beside her, watching her fingers on the keys with fascination. "Would you like to learn?" Diana asked. Emma nodded shyly, and Diana began showing her a simple melody. Thomas climbed into Vincent's lap without being asked, leaning his small head against his father's chest while they listened. Vincent wrapped his arms around his son and let himself feel something other than grief for the first time in 8 months. Hope. As June progressed into July, Vincent found himself thinking about Diana Kendrick more than was probably proper for a man still in mourning. He thought about her smile, about the gentle way she spoke to his children, about how she'd taken her own losses and transformed them into kindness rather than bitterness. He thought about the sound of her laughter when Marmalade did something particularly foolish, and the way afternoon sunlight caught in her honey-colored hair. He told himself it was too soon, that Sarah's memory deserved more than 8 months, 9 months, 10 months. But his wife had been a practical woman who loved him fiercely. She wouldn't have wanted him to remain alone, wouldn't have wanted the children to grow up without a mother's love. It was Emma who forced the issue in early August. Vincent had tucked her into bed and was turning to leave when she said, "Papa, do you like Mrs. Kendrick?" His heart stuttered. "Of course I do. She's a kind neighbor." "No, I mean." Emma struggled with the words. "Do you like her the way you liked Mama?" Vincent sat back down on the edge of her bed. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because you smile when you talk to her. You haven't smiled in so long, and now you do." Emma's dark eyes, so like Sarah's, searched his face. "And she makes you happy. She makes all of us happy. Would that bother you?" "If I cared about Mrs. Kendrick," Emma considered this seriously. "Mama wouldn't want you to be sad forever. She loved you. She'd want you to be happy. You're very wise for 7 years old." "I'm almost 8, Emma corrected. Then, in a smaller voice, "I miss Mama every day." "But I like having Mrs. Kendrick too. Is that wrong?" "No, baby, that's not wrong at all." Vincent kissed her forehead. "You can love your mama's memory and still open your heart to someone new. They're different kinds of love. But knowing it and acting on it were different matters." Vincent wrestled with his feelings for another 2 weeks before finally deciding to speak with Diana honestly. He chose an evening when the children were playing in his yard, within eyesight but out of earshot. "Diana," he said, the use of her first name still feeling bold even though they'd moved to given names weeks ago. "I need to talk with you about something." She must have heard the seriousness in his tone because she set down the mending she'd been working on and gave him her full attention. "What is it?" The words he'd rehearsed fled his mind. Instead, he found himself saying bluntly, "I've developed feelings for you, more than neighborly feelings, and I don't know what to do about it." Diana's eyes widened, but she didn't look displeased. "Vincent, I know it's too soon. I know I should still be mourning Sarah, and I am. I still miss her every day. But these past months, getting to know you, seeing how you've brought life back to my children, how you've brought life back to me." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inarticulacy. "I can't seem to stop thinking about you. It's been 10 months since Sarah passed," Diana said softly. "And 2 years since I lost Daniel. There's no rule book for grief, Vincent, no correct timeline. Do you? Could you ever see yourself caring for someone again? For me?" Diana looked down at her hands, and Vincent's heart sank, certain he'd misread everything, that he'd ruined the friendship they'd built. But when she looked back up, her brown eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I already do care for you," she whispered. "I've been fighting it because I wasn't sure if you were ready, if it was fair to Sarah's memory, if your children would resent me for trying to take their mother's place. But Vincent, I care for you so much it frightens me." The relief that flooded through him was so intense it left him dizzy. "You could never take Sarah's place. You'd be something different, something new. But Diana, I want that. I want you in my life, in our lives properly. I want to court you if you'll let me." "In a town this small, people will talk," Diana warned. "They'll say it's too soon, that it's improper." "Let them talk. I've spent 10 months living in a shadow. I'm ready to step back into the light." He reached for her hand, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers laced through his, warm and alive and real. "Will you let me court you, Diana Kendrick?" "Yes," she said, and smiled through her tears. "Yes, Vincent Dalton, I will." Their courtship was conducted under the watchful eyes of Eureka Springs residents, some approving, others scandalized by the speed of it. But Vincent found he didn't care about the gossip. He'd spent too long caring what others thought, trying to maintain appearances, trying to be the stoic widower everyone expected. He brought Diana flowers from the wild meadow behind his property, bouquets of black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers that she arranged in a blue glass jar on her kitchen table. They took walks in the evening while Emma and Thomas ran ahead with Marmalade following like an orange shadow. He fixed everything on her property that needed fixing, not because she couldn't manage, but because he wanted to, because caring for her felt like breathing. Diana baked bread and pies that she brought to his house, teaching Emma to knead dough and roll crusts. She hemmed Thomas's trousers when they got too short and helped Emma practice her letters. She didn't try to replace Sarah, but carved out her own place in their lives, different but equally precious. In late September, nearly a year after Sarah's death, Vincent took Diana into town on a Saturday afternoon. They walked through the mercantile together, and he bought her a length of deep blue fabric that matched her eyes. At the jeweler's shop, a tiny establishment run by Mr. Herman, a German immigrant, Vincent cleared his throat nervously. "Diana, we've known each other only 4 months, but they've been the most alive I've felt in a year. I don't want to wait anymore, don't want to waste time when life has already shown both of us how short it can be." He took her hand, right there in the middle of the shop with Mr. Herman watching with unabashed interest. "Will you marry me?" Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You're supposed to do this with a ring, Vincent. That's why we're in a jewelry shop," he said, grinning. "I wanted you to pick it out yourself." She laughed, actually laughed with joy, and said, "Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you." Mr. Herman produced a selection of rings, and Diana chose a simple gold band with a small diamond, practical and beautiful like she was. Vincent slipped it on her finger there in the shop, and the jeweler applauded. They were married 6 weeks later, in November of 1882, in the same Baptist church where Vincent had buried Sarah 13 months earlier. It felt right somehow, to claim joy in the same place that had witnessed his deepest sorrow. Emma served as flower girl, scattering petals with solemn concentration, while Thomas carried the rings on a small silk pillow that Diana had sewn. The ceremony was small, just close friends and neighbors, but it felt complete. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Vincent kissed his new bride, he heard Emma and Thomas cheering from the front pew. That night, Diana moved into the house that had been so silent for so long, bringing Marmalade and her few belongings, and suddenly it felt full again, alive again. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Diana stepped carefully around Sarah's memory, never trying to erase her but finding ways to honor her while building something new. She kept the photograph of Sarah on the mantel, explaining to Vincent that the children shouldn't feel they had to forget their mother to love their new one. "I'm not trying to replace her," Diana said one evening as they sat together after the children were in bed. "I'm just trying to give them a different kind of love." "You're remarkable," Vincent told her, pulling her close. "Sarah would have liked you. I hope so. I hope she'd approve of me loving her family. She would. She'd want them happy. She'd want all of us happy." As winter settled over Arkansas, less harsh than Colorado winters, but still cold enough to keep them close to the fire, Vincent watched his new wife teach his children to make paper chains for Christmas decorations. Emma had smiled more in the past 6 months than in the entire year before Diana arrived. Thomas had started calling Diana Mama Diana, which made her cry the first time, though she tried to hide it. On Christmas morning, Vincent gave Diana a piano, or as close as he could manage. A beautiful parlor organ he'd ordered from Little Rock, straining the ranch's finances, but worth every penny to see her face light up. She played carols while they all sang, even Thomas in his off-key 5-year-old voice, and the house rang with music and laughter. In February of 1883, Diana told Vincent she was expecting a baby. They were in the barn where he'd been checking on a mare about to foal, and Diana had come out bundled against the cold to tell him privately before mentioning it to the children. "Are you certain?" Vincent asked, his hands settling on her still flat stomach with wonder. "As certain as I can be. Doc Patterson confirmed it yesterday when I went into town." Vincent swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. A baby. Their baby. He'd never imagined having more children after Sarah's death, had thought Emma and Thomas would be his only legacy. But now there would be new life, a symbol of the second chance they'd both been given. They told Emma and Thomas that evening at supper. Emma's face split into a grin. "A baby. Really, really," Diana confirmed. "Probably around August. Will it be a brother or sister?" Thomas wanted to know. "We won't know until the baby arrives," Vincent said. "But either way, you'll both be wonderful older siblings." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Diana grew round with child, glowing with health and happiness. Vincent found himself falling deeper in love with her every day, watching her tend the garden with her hand pressed to her lower back, listening to her sing to the baby she carried, seeing her patience with Emma and Thomas even when she was exhausted. In mid-August, on a sweltering afternoon that had Vincent wishing for Colorado's mountain breezes, Diana's labor began. Vincent sent Emma running for the doctor while he tried to remember everything Sarah's midwife had done, tried to be calm when inside he was terrified. He'd lost one wife already. He couldn't lose another, but Diana was strong and Doc Patterson arrived quickly. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Vincent sat with Emma and Thomas in the parlor, listening to Diana's cries from the bedroom, holding his children close and praying harder than he ever had. Finally, as dawn light filtered through the windows, a new sound joined the household, a baby's lusty cry. Doc Patterson emerged 10 minutes later smiling. "You have a son, Vincent, a big, healthy boy, and your wife came through just fine." Vincent sagged with relief, then hurried into the bedroom. Diana lay propped against pillows, sweaty and exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced bundle. "Meet your son," she said softly. The baby was indeed big, with a shock of dark hair and powerful lungs. Vincent touched one tiny fist with his finger and the baby's hand closed around it instinctively. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Can Emma and Thomas meet him?" Vincent called the children in and they climbed carefully onto the bed, staring in wonder at their new brother. "What's his name?" Emma asked. Vincent and Diana had discussed names for weeks, finally settling on one that felt right. "Samuel," Diana said. "Samuel Vincent Dalton." Thomas reached out to touch the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "Hello, Samuel. I'm your brother." As Vincent watched his family, all of them together on the bed with his new son at the center, he felt Sarah's presence like a benediction, a blessing on the new life they'd built from the ashes of grief. She would have loved this, he thought. She would have wanted exactly this. The months that followed were chaotic in the way of households with new babies, full of sleepless nights and endless laundry, and the peculiar joy that came from watching a new person discover the world. Samuel was a hungry, happy baby who rarely fussed unless he was wet or wanted to eat. Emma and Thomas doted on him, fighting over who got to hold him or fetch his blanket. Diana navigated motherhood again with grace, nursing Samuel while helping Thomas with his letters, bouncing the baby on her hip while teaching Emma more complicated piano pieces. Vincent watched her juggle it all and fell more in love with her constantly. By Samuel's first birthday in August of 1884, the shadow of grief had lifted entirely from their home. Emma was 9 now, growing tall and serious, already talking about becoming a teacher like Diana had been. Thomas was 6, obsessed with horses and begging his father to teach him to ride. And Samuel was a sturdy 1-year-old who just learned to walk and toddled everywhere with single-minded determination. On a warm September evening, Vincent and Diana sat on their porch watching the 3 children play in the yard. Marmalade, now 8 years old and portly, supervised from his favorite spot on the porch railing. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Diana asked softly. "If I hadn't moved here, if your children hadn't met Marmalade, I think about it sometimes," Vincent admitted. "But mostly I just feel grateful. I don't know if I believe in divine providence or just luck, but either way, you saved us. You brought my children back from wherever grief had taken them, and you brought me back too. You did the same for me. I was just existing before I met you, going through motions. You gave me a reason to live again, not just survive." Vincent took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had that first time he'd told her his feelings. "I love you, Diana, not as a replacement for Sarah, not as second best, but completely and entirely for who you are." "I love you too," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And I love the family we've built together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma teach Thomas a clapping game while Samuel tried to catch fireflies in his pudgy fists. The evening air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of Diana's roses from the garden she'd planted that spring. "I want another baby," Diana said suddenly. Vincent turned to look at her. Yeah. I know we have our hands full, but I want Samuel to have a sibling closer to his age the way Emma and Thomas have each other, and I want—" She paused, searching for words. "I want to fill this house so full of life and love that there's no room left for grief." "Then let's do it," Vincent said, kissing her temple. "Let's have another baby," Diana laughed. "You're agreeing awfully quickly." "I spent a year living in the dark, Diana. Now I'm in the light, and I want to grab every bit of happiness I can while I'm here." He pulled her closer. "Besides, you're a beautiful mother. How could I resist giving you another baby to love?" Their second child together arrived the following June of 1885, a daughter they named Rose Diana Dalton. She came easier than Samuel had, almost too easy, arriving before Doc Patterson could make it to the house. Diana delivered her with only Vincent there to help, both of them laughing with relief when the baby emerged crying and healthy. Rose was a tiny thing compared to her brother, delicate and fair-haired like Diana. Emma was enchanted with having a sister, spending hours holding her and singing to her. Thomas was less impressed with yet another baby, more interested in the colt that had been born the same week. Samuel, now nearly 2, viewed his little sister with deep suspicion, as if unsure why anyone had thought the family needed another baby when they already had him. But gradually, even Samuel warmed to Rose, and the house rang with children's voices, with laughter and crying and all the messy chaos of a full life. Vincent's ranch prospered, allowing him to hire help for the first time so he could spend more time with his growing family. Diana's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for her vases. In 1886, Emma turned 11 and began helping at the schoolhouse in town, assisting the teacher with younger students. Thomas started school himself, though he'd rather have been working with the horses. Samuel was a rambunctious 3-year-old who followed his father everywhere, and Rose was a sweet-natured 1-year-old who just started walking. One evening in the fall, as Vincent helped Diana clean up after supper while the children played in the parlor, she said, "I'm pregnant again." Vincent dropped the plate he'd been drying. It hit the floor with a crash, breaking into 3 neat pieces. "What? Sorry, I should have waited until you weren't holding anything breakable." Diana was grinning, though, clearly delighted by his reaction. "Another baby," Vincent said, still trying to process. "When?" Spring, I think. April or May. Vincent started laughing, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around the kitchen just like he had when she'd told him about Samuel. We're going to need a bigger house at this rate. Are you happy? Diana asked, searching his face. Deliriously. Completely. I love our family, Diana. I love every chaotic, exhausting, wonderful moment of it. Their third child together, and Vincent's fifth, arrived in May of 1887. Another son, healthy and loud, whom they named Daniel Thomas Dalton after Diana's first husband and Vincent's son. It felt right to honor the man who'd come before, to acknowledge that their happiness was built on foundations others had laid. Daniel was a serious baby who rarely smiled but watched everything with intense dark eyes. Emma was 12 now and practically a second mother to the younger children. Thomas was 8 and finally getting his wish to help with the ranch work. Samuel was 4, loud and energetic and into everything. And Rose was 2, a gentle soul who loved flowers and songs. The house Vincent had built for Sarah, that had stood so silent after her death, now overflowed with life. Extra bedrooms had been added to accommodate the growing family. The kitchen table had been replaced with a longer one that could seat them all. Marmalade, now 11 years old, presided over the household like a benevolent orange king. In the summer of 1888, Vincent took his entire family on a trip to Little Rock, something he never could have afforded in the early years, but that the ranch's prosperity now allowed. They stayed in a hotel, rode a streetcar, visited shops that amazed the children. Emma bought books. Thomas wanted to see the railroad depot. Samuel was fascinated by the gaslights, and Rose collected pebbles from every street they walked. On their last evening there, after the children were asleep in their hotel rooms, Vincent and Diana sat by the window looking out over the city lights. 6 years ago, I thought my life was over, Vincent said quietly. I couldn't imagine surviving, let alone being happy again. I felt the same, Diana said. Moving to Arkansas was my last desperate attempt to find a reason to keep going. And instead you found a grieving widower with 2 traumatized children and a cat-loving orange menace. Diana laughed. Best decision I ever made, honestly. Vincent turned to face her, taking her hand in his. You gave me back my children. You gave me back myself. You gave me Samuel and Rose and Daniel and a life so full I can barely catch my breath sometimes. How do I ever thank you for that? You don't need to thank me, Vincent. You did the same for me. We saved each other. They kissed as the city lights twinkled below, 2 people who'd lost everything and found something new and precious in each other. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Emma grew into a young woman, eventually becoming a teacher herself in Eureka Springs. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Vincent grew older, proving to have his father's gift for animal husbandry. Samuel was wild and reckless and kept everyone on their toes. Rose was quiet and artistic, spending hours drawing and playing the organ Diana had taught her to play. And Daniel grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and nature in equal measure. In 1890, when Vincent was 40 years old and Diana was 35, they welcomed their 4th child together and Vincent's 6th, a daughter they named Sarah Emma, honoring both Vincent's first wife and their eldest daughter. It felt like completing a circle, acknowledging the past while celebrating the present. Sarah Emma was a happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone. Her arrival brought the older children together in delight, even Emma coming home from her teaching position on weekends to help with her namesake. The house that had once held only silence and grief now rang with 6 children's voices, with music and laughter and life abundant. On a warm evening in May of 1891, Vincent and Diana celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary. The children had decorated the house with wildflowers, and Emma had baked a cake. After supper, after the children were in bed, after the house had finally quieted, Vincent and Diana sat on their porch in the chairs they'd occupied so many times over the years. 9 years, Diana mused. It feels like a lifetime and also like yesterday. I know what you mean. I can hardly remember what life was like before you, but I also remember every detail of the day we met. You were trying to help me with my supplies, and I was being stubborn about accepting help. You were always stubborn, Vincent teased. It's one of the things I love about you. Diana leaned against him, and they sat watching the stars emerge in the Arkansas sky. Somewhere inside, Marmalade was probably sleeping on one of the children's beds, ancient now at 15 but still lord of his domain. The ranch was quiet, the animals settled for the night, the children dreaming. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? Diana asked, echoing a question she'd posed years before. If you'd never come to help that day, if Emma and Thomas had never noticed Marmalade. Sometimes. But mostly I just think about how lucky we are. How one small moment of kindness changed everything. Your children hadn't smiled since their mother died, Diana said softly, and a cat changed that one day, such a small thing to have such enormous consequences. Vincent pulled her closer. Not a cat, you. You chose to share your cat with 2 grieving children. You chose to be kind when you were carrying your own grief. You chose to open your heart when it would have been easier to stay closed. That's what changed everything, Diana. Your choice to love us. She turned to kiss him, and he wrapped his arms around his wife, his partner, his second chance. Inside the house, their children slept safely. On the ranch, the animals they tended were healthy. The life they'd built together from the wreckage of loss stretched out around them, imperfect and beautiful and wholly theirs. 2 years later, in the spring of 1893, Diana surprised Vincent with news of one more pregnancy. They were both older now, Vincent 43 and Diana 38, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous ones. But in November of that year, they welcomed their 5th child together, a son they named Michael Vincent Dalton. Michael was small and struggled to nurse at first, keeping them up nights and worrying them terribly. But Diana was an experienced mother by now, and with patience and determination, she helped the baby thrive. By his first birthday, Michael was a sturdy toddler who adored his older siblings and followed them everywhere. Emma was 21 by then, courting a nice young man from town. Thomas was 17 and essentially running the ranch while Vincent took a step back. Samuel was 11, still wild but channeling his energy into riding and roping. Rose was 9, quiet and creative and the peacemaker of the family. Daniel was 6, bookish and serious beyond his years. Sarah Emma was 3, sunny and sweet. And Michael was 1, the baby of a large and boisterous family. Vincent sometimes stood at his window, the same window where he'd watched his oldest children's grief so many years before, and marveled at the transformation. The silence that had nearly destroyed them had been replaced by so much noise and life that sometimes he craved a moment of quiet. But mostly he just felt grateful. Diana found him there one evening in 1894, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky we are." He turned to face her, seeing the silver threading through her honey-colored hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes from years of smiling, the capable strength in her frame from raising 7 children. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate it. I'm not lying. You're beautiful to me because of everything you are, everything we've built together." They stood together as the sun set over Arkansas, two people who'd found each other in grief and built something lasting and beautiful from pain. Behind them in the house, their children argued and laughed and lived. Marmalade, ancient and arthritic but still purring, dozed by the fire. The life they'd created hummed with energy and love. In 1896, Emma married her young man, Robert, in a beautiful ceremony at the Baptist church. It was bittersweet for Vincent, giving away his oldest daughter, but also joyful. Emma was radiant, and Robert was a good man who clearly adored her. Thomas married the following year, bringing his wife Martha to live on the ranch in a cottage Vincent helped him build. The ranch was growing, expanding, becoming a family enterprise that would sustain multiple generations. As the years rolled into the new century, Vincent and Diana watched their children grow and thrive. Emma had 2 children of her own, making Vincent and Diana grandparents. Thomas and Martha had a daughter. Samuel eventually settled down, much to everyone's surprise, marrying a spirited young woman who was his perfect match. Rose became an artist, selling her paintings in Little Rock. Daniel went to college, the first in the family to do so. Sarah Emma was growing into a lovely young woman. And Michael, their youngest, was the joy of their later years. In 1905, Vincent turned 55 and Diana 50. They'd been married 23 years, together for 24. More of Vincent's life had been spent with Diana than with Sarah, and while he still remembered his first wife with love, she felt like part of a distant past, a different life. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Vincent stood to make a toast. 25 years ago, I married a woman who'd already saved my life, though I hadn't told her that yet. Diana, you took 2 children who'd forgotten how to smile and a man who'd forgotten how to live, and you loved us back to wholeness. You gave us 5 more children, a house full of laughter, and a life beyond anything I could have imagined. Every day with you has been a gift. Diana was crying, and so were half their children. Vincent, you gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me a family when I thought I'd never have one again. You loved me when I was broken and stayed with me while we both healed. These 25 years have been everything I never knew I needed. They kissed while their children cheered, and Vincent thought about that day so long ago when he'd watched Emma and Thomas stare listlessly at fence posts, when silence had filled his house like poison. He thought about the widow who'd moved in next door, about an orange cat who'd captured 2 children's attention, about small kindnesses that grew into love. His children hadn't smiled since their mother died, and the widow next door had changed that one day, simply by being kind, by sharing her cat, by opening her heart when it would have been easier to stay closed. That one day had led to this. 25 years of marriage, 7 children, multiple grandchildren, and a love that had healed them both. Diana took his hand, squeezing gently, and Vincent squeezed back. 25 years, and he loved her more every day. Their journey from grief to joy, from silence to laughter, from death to life, had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. As the celebration continued around them, as their children and grandchildren filled the house that had once stood silent, Vincent pulled Diana close and whispered, "Thank you for teaching my children to smile again. Thank you for teaching me to live again. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for letting me," Diana whispered back. "Thank you for choosing love again, for giving me a family, for building this beautiful life with me." They held each other as evening fell over the Arkansas hills, 2 people who'd lost everything and found something even more precious in each other. The house rang with voices and laughter, just as it would for generations to come. And somewhere, Vincent liked to think, Sarah was smiling too, glad that the family she'd started had continued, that the children she'd loved had found happiness again, that the man she'd married had found love in the midst of loss. The grief that had once seemed insurmountable had been transformed, not erased but integrated, woven into the fabric of a life rich with love and meaning. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a cat, and a widow willing to love a grieving family back to wholeness.